Okay, so welcome everybody to today's presentation. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. If you could just keep yourselves on mute as the presentation is going on, and then feel free to unmute to ask any questions that you may have. And I'll watch the chat if you feel more comfortable and want to put your questions in the chat. So today I would like to welcome Steph Simcoe and Chris Tompkins from Loud Women Collective. Appreciate you coming here today, and it was timely. I think when Chris and I talked to, with it being Pride Month, that it was a great fit for June. So thank you so much for coming in today, and I will hand it off to you.
Thanks, Lori, and thank you so much everyone for coming, and thanks for having us. We're definitely very happy to be here. My name is Chris. My pronouns are she, they, and I am the founder of the Loud Women Collective, a local grassroots movement focused on promoting and bringing awareness to feminist issues, one of which being the equality, inclusiveness of 2S LGBTQ folks in our community.
Just checking, can everyone see the slides?
Yeah, we can see them.
Perfect. Now can I flip through them? Next question. There we go. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Steph. I'm a settler living on First Will First Nations territory, and I identify as a cis queer woman. I will use she and her pronouns. I come from an education background of English and social justice studies, and I'm able-bodied and living with mental illness. I like to position myself at the beginning of a facilitation because all of my experience impact what I bring and how I approach everything. So coming here as an educator and a member of the queer community today.
We are here today for Pride Month to talk about the importance of LGBTQ+ representation in stories and books. Before I pass it over to Steph, here's a bit about the collective and the book club. The LWC is fairly new, having launched in March of 2020, just days before the pandemic hit. Did my sound just cut out? Or can you still hear me? Oh, okay.
It's just you.
All right, sorry. Our plans have been on hold, but as things open up, we are set to launch storefront headquarters at the Urban Market Goods & Co. at the end of the summer. And we are beginning to develop our first workshops. Our workshops will be themed on different feminist issues with a crafting element to get people working together and learning a new skill while we talk. Before we launched the LWC, we were the Loud Women Book Club, which began in 2019, a nonfiction feminist book club that has now been running for over 2 years. The goal of the book club is to encourage community members to read and educate themselves on important feminist issues while providing a space for honest conversation and personal growth. We have a Thunder Bay and a Sudbury chapter, as well as a monthly online discussion. And you can find the link. We will put the link after. I'll do it when Steph is talking into the chat. While our book list covers a wide range of topics and a diverse group of authors, we do strictly read nonfiction books, but that doesn't mean we don't love our fiction. We're going to start off with a 2S LGBTQ community overview, and then we'll get into the book stuff. So I'm going to pass it over to Steph.
So I'm going to preface this with, this is a lot of information in a very short time. So if you're feeling like it's quite a lot, don't worry. All of the slides are going to be sent and shared with you. So you will have this information to go through and digest. Yes, it's a lot. So we're going to do our best to get through it. Yeah, because 2S LGBTQ+ folks have a lot of different diverse experiences, social locations, and identities. There isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all approach, but we're coming at this with most up-to-date information we have, and with the understanding that we're going to be constantly learning and, you know, continuing to grow as allies and as members of the community. And I kind of hope it goes without saying, but the Loud Women Collective fosters a safe, respectful, and inclusive environment. And this also applies to our virtual platforms as well. So we do have a bit of a code of conduct, which I hope everyone will adhere to. And if we see anything, you know, we'll call you in about it. All right. So the first part, we're going to break down the acronym and talk a little bit about pronouns. So 2S LGBTQIA is the current expanded acronym. You'll also hear LGBT+, 2S LGBTQ, queer as like a blanket statement from the community. In academic areas, you'll sometimes hear diverse sexualities and genders, as well as gender and sexual minorities. So overall, 2S LGBTQ stands for two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, and asexual. This is an umbrella acronym for a slew of folks who experience marginalization based on gender orientation and or gender identity. Like I said before, a lot of diverse experiences, so we're going to cover a lot of ground here. Starting with the 2S. 2S stands for two-spirit, and this is a term used by some Indigenous people in Turtle Island, which is North America. And it speaks to embodying both masculine and feminine spirits. This can be used to describe gender identity or gender sexuality. Two-spirit was created back in 1990 at a conference by Elder Mira Laramie, who is still a very active two-spirit elder. And 2S LGBTQ, we're placing 2S at the beginning to acknowledge and recognize Indigenous queer folks who were on this land before settlers, non-Indigenous folks came. As I stated, two-spirit can identify your gender or your orientation, or neither or both. And Indigenous folks are the only people who can use two-spirit because it speaks to a specific cultural component. And I have here too the book by a local queer elder, Manish Akabe, The Two-Spirit Journey. I think it's available a couple places around the city. It is a great read if you have a chance to pick it up. The L stands for lesbian, and this refers to self-identifying women who are primarily attracted to romantically, erotically, or emotionally to other women. And both women and non-binary people may use this term to describe themselves. The G stands for gay, and gay encompasses like attraction solely or primarily to members of your same gender. Predominantly, this is used in reference to men, but women also can refer to themselves as gay. B stands for bisexuality. Bisexual refers to a person who experiences attraction to some people of their gender or another gender. And this can also be an umbrella term. Some folks might have heard of pansexual, queer, that's the term I use, omnisexual, or fluid. On my page, I'm kind of going rogue here. And I just want to bring up to you that folks who identify as bisexual often face disproportionate rates of violence. And one theory of this is because they experience biphobic discrimination from heterosexual as well as the gay community. Bi-erasure and biphobia are unfortunately quite rampant in the queer community. And this speaks to kind of not seeing bisexuality as valid and even just experiencing violence because of that identity. The T stands for trans, so transgender. Trans can be used again as an umbrella term, and trans speaks to the opposite of cisgender. So trans is not identifying with the sex you were assigned at birth, whereas cisgender is you identify with the sex you were assigned at birth. We're going to talk through gender identities and biological sex a little later, so I can expand on this. I said it's an umbrella term, and many folks within the trans community transition in some respects, sometimes socially, physically, or not at all. But this might refer to changes in appearance, names, pronouns, or physical changes to your body. Not all trans folks undergo medical treatments. Some people do. They will use hormones or have gender-affirming surgeries, but these are choices, and it's not a requirement to be considered trans. Non-binary also falls under the trans umbrella, and this is a term for folks who don't identify with the binary. And when I talk about a binary, it's one end as woman, one end as man, either or. Folks who identify as non-binary are off of that binary completely. And again, I'll expand on this a little more when we look at something later. All right, Q and Q. So the Q stand for queer and questioning. So questioning refers to an individual who or a time in their lives where they're unsure or exploring their sexual orientation or gender identity or expression. And queer is an umbrella term to describe individuals who don't identify as straight or cisgender. And it can also be used as a standalone identity with various aspects of a person's sex, sexuality, gender identity, and expression. So a question I get a lot as someone who does identify as queer is, isn't queer a slur? And my answer could be yes, if you are intending to weaponize this word as an insult or as something to be harmful. But queer was a word that was reclaimed by many people of the queer community. Because why should it be used to cause harm? It has been embraced by some members of the community. It has not been embraced by others, which is important to also consider when choosing the language that you're going to use. Like I said, I identify as queer. I will refer to the queer community, but that doesn't speak to everyone's experiences within the community. The I stands for intersex, and this is a general term used for a variety of situations. Isn't the word that should be on here. A person could be born with reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't fit into, again, this binary of male or female. So intersex recognizes this biological variance that definitely occurs, and kind of shakes up binary understandings and rigidness around sex that often don't make it possible for folks to exist in. And there's a growing awareness around the intersex community, a lot of research, a lot of personal stories sharing. Formally, some people might be aware with the terms hermaphrodite and hermaphroditic. These are not used, these are considered derogatory and outdated. And the A stands for asexual or ace. So asexuality is experiencing little to no sexual attraction to others or a lack of interest in sexual relationships or behaviors. And this exists on a continuum as well. There's folks that they would identify as fully ace, some folks as demisexual. I'll talk a little more about different terms later on too. And a reminder, the A does not stand for ally. So we've unpacked this acronym, and I think it's important to bring up allyship, because allyship is really important with the queer community or really many marginalized communities. The A does not stand for allies. This is nothing against allies. Allies and advocates have been and will continue to be very important in the fight for equity with queer rights. But the acronym is meant to represent the community, and the A does represent members of the community already. While allies deserve to be recognized, it's just outside of the acronym. And when we talk about allyship, it's always important to remember that it is a verb, it's an ongoing commitment, and even one notch up, I consider it from allyship is advocacy, which is an active commitment, tending tolerance to educating folks and supporting a social or marginalized group. All right, so we're on to the genderbread person. So this is a PDF that I've shared and can be sent out. There's also a worksheet that goes along with it, which you can do on your own, because we're going to talk about gender a little bit. So gender can be a pretty tough cookie to crack, which is great that we have a cookie here with us. There are a lot more facets to considering gender than we often think or learn about, and a lot of societal pressures at play when it comes to gender too. So this resource is something you can also find online. I think it's genderbread.com or something like that. I think it's shared in our references. But this could be it's a really good breakdown of these components that really encapsulate gender. So we have 4. We have our assigned sex, gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation. And I'll start just by saying that these things are all independent from one another. If this doesn't totally make sense at the moment, we'll kind of summarize that at the end too. So we'll start with gender identity. So this is all about how you in your head think about yourself. We usually form our gender identities pretty early in life, from the age of 3 to the age 3 onward, and after that point it can be kind of difficult to change because there are a lot of societal pressures with traditional gender roles and just even in language, the way we talk about one another. we'll see at the bottom, we have this binary. On one side, there is woman, the other side, there is man, and in the middle is genderqueer. And across that spectrum, there's various different identities here. So when we're thinking about our gender identities, we can ask ourselves, do I fit into this role, societal role as woman or man, or neither, or both in between? There's can be a lot of fluidity, and like the answer to that question is looking at your gender identity. Next, we have gender expression. And this is all about how we demonstrate the gender through the ways that we act, dress, behave, and interact. Oftentimes, this can be without even really thinking about it. And often how we perceive people's genders is through their gender expression. So I was saying to Chris, when I got dressed today, I was conscious to wear a button-up, because button-ups are actually quite a sign actually within the queer community. A lot of queer women will go for button-ups because it's a thing. But when I consider my gender expression, I am often coded as female and feminine because of my long hair, even though I might not necessarily identify that way. At the bottom, again, we have feminine on one side, masculine on the other, androgynous in between. And there's, again, quite a few different terms there as well. Biological sex. This seems to be the most straightforward one, also known as assigned sex. And this refers to objectively measurable organs, hormones, and chromosomes that you possess. So when folks are born, the doctor looks at you and says, it's a insert boy or girl. So when I was born, the doctor said, it's a girl. And as I went through my life, I said, yeah, I identify with the sex I was assigned at birth. I identify as being female, identify as being a woman, which means I am cis. Now, if I was born and the doctor said, it's a girl, and growing up through my experience, I said, I don't really identify with being female. And this would be a notion of being trans. You don't identify with the sex you were assigned at birth. Sexual orientation. You'll notice the first three all fall around gender in some capacity. But sexual orientation is kind of completely different too. And this is all about who we are, how we perceive and experience attraction, whether physically, spiritually, or emotionally. And this is whether, again, on one end you have heterosexual, on the other end you have homosexual, gay, and bisexual, and all kinds of variants in the middle. I think when people think about the queer community, they think only of sexuality, which there's a whole lot of other stuff going on there. So it's always good to kind of point that out. So getting back to my previous statement that gender identity, expression, assigned sex, and sexual orientation are independent from one another. Someone's sexual orientation doesn't determine what their gender expression will be, and their gender expression isn't necessarily determined by their gender identity. So there can be a lot of different variants in that. And that's often what's so great about the community is there's so many various rays of color of people. All right, I'm gonna hand it over to Chris for pronouns.
For time. I know it's a lot of information, so thanks everyone for staying with us. What is a pronoun? A pronoun is an article of speech that takes the place of a person's name. We use pronouns every day and often without thinking too much about it. However, in many languages, pronouns have implied gender, and this can mean we often will make assumptions about a person's gender without realizing it. Example number one, Steph is presenting today. She is doing great. So she shared her pronouns at the beginning of the presentation. However, without sharing her pronouns, 75% of the time she's assumed to use she, most likely because of the long hair. Example number two, Chris is presenting today. They are doing great. Yeah, that's it for that one. She, her, hers, and he, him, his are a few commonly used pronouns. Gender neutral pronouns. A gender neutral or gender inclusive pronoun is a pronoun which does not associate a gender with the individual who's being discussed. Some languages, such as English, do not have a gender neutral or third gender pronoun available. There are also lots of gender neutral pronouns in use. Here are a few you might hear. They, them, theirs. This is a pretty common gender neutral pronoun. and it can be used in the singular. Example, Shay ate their food because they were hungry. Z, here, less common but still used. Z is pronounced like Z. Can also be spelled Z-I-E or X-E and replaces she, he, they. Here is pronounced like here and replaces her, hers, him, his, they, and theirs. Example, Tyler ate here food because Z was hungry. Never refer to a person as it or he, she. This should be self-explanatory this time. Like, you know, we really hope that it is, but we're just going to throw it out there anyways. These are offensive slurs used against trans and gender non-conforming individuals, and they are not acceptable. Why are pronouns important? You can't always know what someone's pronouns are by looking at them. Asking incorrectly using someone's pronouns is one of the most basic ways to show your respect for their gender identity. When someone is referred to with the wrong pronoun, it can make them feel disrespected, invalidated, dismissed, alienated, or dysphoric, often all of the above. It is a privilege to not have to worry about which pronoun someone is going to use for you based on how they perceive your gender. If you have this privilege yet fail to respect someone else's gender identity, it is not only disrespectful and hurtful, but also oppressive. So we're going to make mistakes. I'm still making mistakes. Maybe Steph still makes mistakes, probably, I don't know, but I definitely still make mistakes. I am, you know, doing my best, as we all are, and especially coming from being home for so long. When we get back into that community, we need to do the best we can to, you know, respect like all members of our community, right? So if we make a mistake, it's okay. Everyone slips up from time to time. The best thing to do, if you use the wrong pronoun for someone, is to say something right away, like, sorry, I meant insert pronoun. And if you realize your mistake after the fact, apologize in private and move on. If you are continually misgendering someone after being corrected multiple times, then that is like definitely not okay. Often when a person calls you in to correct you on their pronouns, they are doing so because they care. And this is often a sign that you need to do better. A lot of the time, it can be tempting to go on and on about how bad you feel that you messed up or how hard it is for you to get it right. Please don't. It is inappropriate and makes the person who was misgendered feel awkward and responsible for comforting you, which is definitely not their job. Sorry, my headphone is falling out. Yeah, so now we're going to move on to, I believe, a brief history of pride. If you have any questions about pronouns, you can throw them in the chat. A question that might come up, which maybe you can speak to afterwards, is the she/they or the he/they. I don't think we've covered that anywhere, which can be a bit confusing for some.
Grace, can I just interrupt you for half seconds?
Yeah.
Do you want me to save the questions to the end? There are two questions now.
What do you want to say?
Are they about what we just talked about?
One, yeah, it is a pronoun question. You want me to, yeah, okay.
Sure.
Is it appropriate when speaking with a new client to ask what pronoun they prefer, even if their government documentation states one or the other?
Yeah, I would say a good approach is, if you're meeting a client for the first time, get into the practice of sharing your own pronouns to, one, normalize it. Say, hi, my name is Steph. I use she, her pronouns. It'll open a space for this person to share with you. If they're not sure kind of what you're doing, you can explain, like, when we speak about myself, I'll use she and her, and check in to see what works best for them. IDs and documentation can be tricky because it is always best to use the language that the person is using for themselves. There could be a lot of reasons why someone's ID doesn't match the pronouns that they use. It can be an expensive process to change all of your documentation, and it can be a very long process too. So we're talking about pronouns. People tend to use preferred. Pronouns are, they're not, I prefer to use this. If this is what I'd like to use, then this is what I'd like you to use. So I think it is absolutely appropriate, and normalizing it by sharing your own pronouns is a good way to, one, build rapport, because often when you share your pronouns, some people might not understand, but the people that do understand, that could mean a lot. It could open up and kind of even show that this person could be a safe person to engage with. That covers that.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. And then just a comment was thank you, because we are so taught never to use their as singular and etc. in English classes, and actually taught to use he or she.
Yeah, and I can say this as someone with a master's in English. English has evolved, and they was actually, it was named the, 2015 word of the year as the singular they. You can use it in singular. It is definitely possible. And if someone says no, tell them an English major told you you could.
All right. So thank you guys for those questions, and keep them coming. If you have anything else, like, yeah, that's what we're here for today. Okay, so we're going to do a brief history of Pride. Why is Pride important, or still important? Pride Month and raising awareness of the 2S LGBTQ plus community continues to be important. As much as it's a celebration, it is also a time to reflect on the injustice and inequality that still exists in society. So I'm going to give you some stats now. Globally, there are 70 countries, 70, where LGBTQ people continue to be criminalized. There are 12 countries who have the death penalty for consensual same-sex sexual acts between adults, which is crazy. 2S LGBTQ plus folks face higher rates of dating violence, victimization, more physical and psychological abuse by partners in adulthood, and more experience of sexual assault in adulthood. Ongoing transphobia. In 2020, over 350 transgender people were killed by hate-motivated action. Trans people face discrimination and stigma in many different ways. Many are subject to physical attack and abuse, as well as facing discrimination in the provision of goods and services, healthcare, housing, and employment. LGBT youth are almost 5 times as likely to have attempted suicide compared to heterosexual youth. 25 to 40% of homeless youth in Canada identify as 2S LGBTQ+, with many youth leaving or being kicked out of unsupportive homes. Conversion therapy, the notion of changing a person's gender identity or sexuality through means described as violent and traumatic. Last night, Canadian Parliament passed a motion to criminalize conversion therapy.
Yeah.
That's
like there's
awesome.
62 opposed, 200 and something.
62 opposed. That's embarrassing, I think. Having public conversations about sexuality, gender identities, and gender expressions continues to be important. Having the language to explore your identity and desires, understanding that our sense of selves does not have to be limited, and that there are other people we can connect and form communities with, can be life-saving for queer youth. So we've got our key takeaways from our whole primer for the first step. The key takeaways are: Pride started out as a riot. It is important to recognize and acknowledge the ongoing resistance of the queer community. Self-identifying is key. Use the term someone uses for themselves. They know their identity best, so follow their lead. Pronouns are not preferred, they just are. Using someone's proper pronouns is a sign of respect and acceptance. If you mess up, acknowledge it and move on. Most folks understand that change in language takes time, so keep showing up and putting in the effort. Limit your apologies, as that puts accountability on the queer person to support you. Just acknowledge and continue. Which is important. We don't want to gush and make it about ourselves, right? And how we feel. You should just say sorry and continue.
And I find a lot of time pronouns are what is really hard for people. It's something that people are more aware of, that they could easily make a mistake on, and there could be immediate harm. So yeah, I find pronouns and understanding the acronym are the big things people think about when understanding the community. Now let's talk about some books. So we're going to talk a bit about the book club and the types of books we focus on and why it's important. So the queer literary landscape looks quite different now. It's very vibrant and expansive, but it was not always. There were many books that were banned for having explicit 2S LGBTQ content, books that were seen as taboo and not carried or removed from school curriculums. Yeah, One About a Penguin specifically is still banned in quite a few countries. And there are quite a few number of queer focused publishing houses now, and agencies, as well as writers collectives. So yeah, representation matters, and it's slowly starting to kind of build. So why does it matter? I think there's a power in seeing yourself represented in something that you're consuming, whether it's a book or media or something in the world. It kind of signals to you that you're not alone. Envisioning a character, whether they're fictional or not, who shares similar preferences or identities with you, cannot be overstated how important this is. And it can be especially important for children or teenagers, because you're kind of, at that time, you're looking for examples of who you are in the world and where you fit. And that also goes for Black, Indigenous, people of color, as well as differently abled folks who often don't see themselves represented in literature either. So we shared a little quote here: literature can provide a safe haven of knowledge and reassurance for those whose feelings stray from the normalized biologies and identities. So we were just kind of going to throw an open question to folks, and if we want to discuss, we can. So think about a book or media, so a movie, something that you identify with either in your younger days. I say that as not a very young person, but that's something you identified with, and kind of what that meant to you growing up. And I'm sure we can share examples. I'm trying to think now of what I had, but
Well, I have mine. So I'm someone that's still like questioning my gender identity, or like trying to figure that out as, you know, an adult. For me, it was definitely Jo from Little Women. I read that book. I couldn't even tell you how many times I read that book. And as a child, that's really like who I identified with, and like seeing that kind of, you know, that tomboy. We talk a lot about that term, but tomboy representation in novel, and a woman, you know, being forced to be something that she didn't really feel that she was, or being forced into a role that she didn't feel fit. So that was a huge one for me.
For myself, I grew up outside of Thunder Bay in a rural area, and did not really have a lot of access to queer anything, resources, role models, etc. So I didn't really engage with a lot of queer books until I was older, actually in university. But even then, it made a really big difference on how I came to understand my sexuality, as well as my identity and expression. And again, with imagining something like that, if anyone has any examples, feel free to jump on and share. In tandem with thinking about how important this was, imagine the experience of not having it. How would it feel to kind of not fit into anything that you're seeing out there? I can talk about it. Another part about fiction and reading is the building of empathy through reading. There's actually a lot of research that connects these two things, building empathy and through reading. So empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. And when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Fiction is essentially an exploration of another person's experience. In reading books written by and for the queer community from an early age can really increase levels of understanding and acceptance. Yeah. And I'll just also put this out there too, is what I've loved seeing in the contemporary queer sphere is the normalizing of happy queer stories and narratives. A lot of times when we hear about marginalized communities, we hear stories of struggle and difficulty and often violence. And while those stories are very important, because I don't think we can lose sight of like ongoing injustices in our society, hearing about and seeing experiences of queer elders who are, you know, sharing their stories, or young trans folks that who, you know, are just out living and existing, that can be so important to know that there is sunshine, there's not always darkness. And I think that goes with any marginalized community, seeing yourself represented. See, so Chris and I put together a list of books ranging from classic queer stories to contemporary, as well as books for youth, as well as books for teens, and even some TV and movies for folks who love to binge. So yeah. There might be some that are kind of familiar. I think I knew quite a lot of these, I'm surprised. And there's even a few books too that we have on our reading list for the book club. I think on here I see Sissy, as well as Like a Boy or Two I was able to engage with in the book club. And we've always been here.
A lot of information.
A lot of information, but again, this was a list share.
And you might recognize some of the books off the contemporary page too. There's two that were in the CBC Reads this year, which was Butter, Honey, Pig Bread and Johnny Appleseed, are two that were in the, actually, I believe they were the top two.
Yeah, I think so. So we have our references too, in case anyone wants to learn a bit more, as well as just a thank you for listening and connect with us. And we're open for any questions or even just discussion.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much for all the information. If anybody has questions, please feel free. You could unmute yourself and talk. If you feel more comfortable, use a text chat. And there was a couple of things here going back. I have a teaching degree in English. I'm an English major, laugh out loud. Not everyone knows this yet, so thank you very much. Going back to the pronouns, very isolating for the question when you talked about the books, and those are great reads. And then Chantel said, great book choices. She needs a list. I've got to read, or I've read some of them. So thank you for providing that. And I've also dropped in the chat the information stuff that you sent to me.
Perfect. Yeah, we shared both the slides. There's an expanded and updated version of the Gingerbread Person that you can read through. It has a little more information than what I had on here. It would have just been way too small to have on the screen. There's also a worksheet which you can go through and kind of, map out how you fit on your own gender expression identity and what that means to you. And the book list. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. There are so many more books that we could have added, but we kind of pulled some of our favorites and some well-known books as well.
Yeah, like some of the ones on there, like this year in particular, I read quite a bit, and I've been really like going out of my way to make sure that I'm reading almost exclusively when it comes to, I'm going to say that my fiction and my nonfiction, but almost exclusively like people of different cultures, backgrounds, etc., than myself, to try and really put myself, into that experience. And even just reading, I think there was a book called Queenie that was a fiction, and even just in reading that one, it was just the story of a Black woman. And while reading that and getting her, experience, even just the day-to-day, and you notice the differences between your life and theirs, like based on like how you grew up and your expression, like your experiences. So it's a great way, even through fiction, to just learn about different cultures while enjoying the story, I guess.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing all of this. Ignorantly, I admit I was very confused on some of the pronouns, and although I'm aware, I just didn't really know which to use when, so I kind of didn't. So thank you for enabling me to communicate better.
Yeah, we're happy again to share. And again, well, I use she and her. Chris also uses she and they, which I can speak to a little bit more, just to kind of talk about what that means to them too.
Yeah, so as I said before, I'm someone that's still just like kind of questioning and unpacking all of this through the books that I'm reading through the book club, and through like what I'm trying to do to like better understand, how things are going. So I decided on she/they a little while ago when I first heard it, because where I definitely don't identify as him, I'm comfortable with she, because I don't feel like a disconnect from the female part of myself. But I also am comfortable with they, because I definitely don't feel just female or just girl, I guess, would be how the she, they. So that can be a bit of a confusing one because that's, I think, even a bit newer too, or like less seen. Like the obvious is like the she, her, they, them, he, him. So you can also use more than one if you're comfortable. I do have a best friend who was using she, they. She presents as more female, like she's a femme or whatever, but she found that people were only using the she because that's how she looked. So she dropped the she and is just going with they, them now because it's, because no one was using the they, them when it came to her. Them. See? Just move on.
And I think too, Chris raises the point that if someone uses they, them pronouns, that doesn't necessarily tell you much anything about their expression or even necessarily their gender. Not all trans folks use they pronouns. Non-binary folks can use they pronouns as well. And I'll share this just because I have permission from my partner who actually transitioned within this past year. So learning both to reevaluate what our relationship means and how we identify. We actually sat down with the genderbread person and walked through each aspect of it because while some aspects changed, others didn't. But yeah, and like just from what I've learned from them is there is an understanding that it takes time to change your language. I mean, I'm now in a relationship with someone who goes by a different name and uses different pronouns. And while that can be difficult, I think the hardest part hasn't been us navigating the relationship, but actually navigating how people perceive it and talking to our families about it, both generationally. We see a difference between how folks engage with it and don't. And I think the big reminder is we're all human and we're navigating as best we can. And the more empathy we can have for one another to take time and understand, the easier it's going to be for all of us. So there's always lots to share, and I'm thankful that we were able to come together in a space to learn. I know it was a lot of information and I didn't even cover everything. So there's always great resources. And again, we shared some of those with Lori, and the internet is a great resource too. YouTube for queer anything has been also very good. So I could always find some YouTube videos to share as well.
There's a couple of things in the chat. Just wanted to mention, thank you for doing this and sharing this information. I'm so happy to learn about this, so important. Thank you for this great presentation. Building empathy through reading is something I'll carry with me. And thank you for sharing good information to be aware of.
I'll say as well that, like, you know, obviously a huge thank you to Steph for putting together all this information. You know, it takes a village, and I would not be able to do what I do without the team that I have. I would not be able to give this presentation and speak from, you know, experience on everything. So it's definitely, you know, who we surround ourselves with that makes things like this possible. So.
Thank you. You know, there is one more other question. Are the same pronouns used in French also? If not, which ones are used?
Oh, I knew this was going to come. This is always the curveball question because this is really hard. A lot of languages are inherently gendered. And I think I'm not as well versed in gender neutral language in other languages other than English. So I don't actually have an answer to this, but I can look into it. I do have a few folks that I know in Montreal working to do work around this because it is really important. And there are some languages that a third gender actually exists within, it's built into the language. But I know for Spanish as well as French, it's not necessarily, I think in French, almost everything is gendered in ways that it isn't in English. I can look into that and I can try to find a better answer or some resources at the very least.
I'm going to say as well, just as you were saying, folks, I thought maybe we should talk about that too, because that's something that I've been personally working on. Obviously, like I said before, you know, we're spending a lot of time at home, but as we go back out and as things reopen, we get back out into the community, you can gender neutralize some of the language you use in in other ways too. Like, for example, you pick up your coffee at Starbucks, and instead of saying, thanks guys, you say, thanks folks. Yeah, so I don't know what other examples I'm going to come up with right now, but I personally use dude a lot because because I grew up in the 90s. So I've been refraining from calling people dude because I know that can be more masculine. And yeah, trying to like gender neutralize even just greetings. Another great one is if you work in like a restaurant or whatever, or if you're in that kind of experience, like a lot of times the wait staff will come up and be like, good morning, ladies, or good afternoon, gentlemen. And, you know, if we can just get away from using that kind of language too, because it can be harmful. When I'm out with my son, he has long hair and he gets misgendered on the regular because people assume he's a girl. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't hurt him in any way, but we do try to correct people. Yeah, to stop that. We get ladies a lot when him and I go out together. So we can just be conscious of greetings even is a huge step if you can try and work on that.
Ellen, do you have a question?
It's a question comment. I had the question earlier about pronouns. I work with a lot of students and in the driving world, and so we see their government issued identification, and so that's not necessarily telling for me because I don't actually. I have the blessed position of meeting them virtually and talking to them on the phone to book their appointments. So most of the time, I get a lot of the backstory without even asking necessarily. And so I try to identify each student just by their name. And they are very prompt to correct you if they have a preference in one way or the other. And I have some students that change their pronoun or change their mind. I want to say weekly or monthly, and it's interesting to pardon me. It's interesting to try to keep up with that on the paperwork end of things, to always make those notations. So I just refer to them as teenage humans or adult peoples. I had only 2 get offended, and they said they did not want to be referred to as a human. And so I asked them what they wanted to be referred to, thinking they might want to be referred to as a spirit of some kind. I was aware that I didn't have the correct wording, but now I might, going back through these notes. And they wanted to identify as a robot. I didn't know that was the first time that I had encountered that. So it was interesting.
Yeah, the youth today are quite vocal, and I find a lot of queer youth will have no qualms telling you, this is the name I use, these are the pronouns I use. My brother is a teacher, and even when I was working at the university, something I helped create was, along with some students that were non-binary and trans, was just a different form that someone could have. Because sometimes it can be mortifying when you go into a class and there's a roll call and you're registered with a name that you do not use. So it's just a form to say, like, this is the name I'm registered with. Do you have a name you would like me to use? And they can add an option. Do you use pronouns differently than ascribed to your ID? And also giving options too, if it's going to be engagement with calling home at all, saying, are these pronouns you'd like me to use one-to-one, yes or no? Are these pronouns you'd like me to use in front of the class, yes or no? And are these the pronouns you'd like me to use if engaging with home? Because sometimes kids and youth will have different experiences, whether they're out at school or out at home. So, and again, these, when we talk about it, sometimes they can be really aha moments because we might have never considered it. If it's, we call it ignorance, but to be fair, if something is outside of our lived experience, it can sometimes be really hard to even imagine it. But that's also why we have conversations like this. It's why we read, again, to build empathy and to learn about, and just continuing to grow as people and being open to learning about other people's experiences. We're always continually learning and growing. That's what I find fascinating about people and why I like people. So.
Does anybody else have any other questions? And if you think of any questions later on or anything like that, yeah, please take note on the side here on the screen. There's how you can reach Chris or Steph. Anyways, but if there's no other questions, I want to say thank you very much for coming in today and providing this information. You know, like you said, there's a lot of questions and, you know, unknowns and stuff like that. So it's really great that you both were able to come in and, you know, provide this information to everyone here. So thank you so much. So,
Thank you for the opportunity, Lori. Thanks
Yeah.
for having us.
Great to have you. And thanks again for the list of the resources and information that everybody can access. So thank you very much. And thanks everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And same link if you haven't registered for the next webinar, if you wanted to join us, it's 10-second intros with Holly Marie Conway. So if you wanted to come, click on the link at just before 12:15. So anyways, thanks everybody. Have a great day and we'll talk to everybody soon. Bye.